He wouldn't look at me the same way after that winter. Not with pity, not with doubt, with something I hadn't seen in years, trust that didn't need to be earned twice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started 3 months before the storm, when I made a decision that turned me into the town joke. I began stacking firewood. Not in a shed, not in a neat little pile by the back door, all the way around my house. Every single wall, layer after layer, like I was building a fortress out of split oak and hickory. The neighbors thought I'd finally lost it. I'm a veteran, came back from 2 tours overseas, with a German shepherd named Rex, and a preference for silence over small talk. The kind of guy people whisper about at the grocery store, but never ask how he's doing. I didn't mind. Rex and I had survived worse than loneliness. We knew how to keep our heads down and our systems running. But this got their attention. What's he doing now? I heard Mrs. Cranston ask her husband one morning, as I measured the gap between logs. She didn't bother lowering her voice. Building a cabin inside a cabin, looks like. He laughed. Probably thinks the government's coming for him. I didn't correct them, didn't explain, just kept stacking. Rex helped. She'd trot over with smaller logs clamped gently in her jaws, tail wagging like we were playing some kind of game. She was a retired canine, explosive detection, civilian safety, the works. Smart enough to know when I was working on something that mattered. Smart enough to play along even when she didn't fully understand why. The thing is, I did know why. I'd been watching the weather patterns, reading the Farmer's Almanac, listening to the old-timers at the hardware store talk about winters that hadn't hit in 40 years. And I'd been checking my bank account, which told me the same story every month. No money for a new furnace, no money for insulation upgrades, no money for the kind of heating bills that would come if this winter turned out the way my gut said it would. So I adapted, like I'd been trained to do. I started with the north wall, the one that caught the worst wind, stacked the wood tight, but not flush, left just enough space for airflow, covered the base with gravel for drainage, secured tarps over the top to keep the snow from soaking through. It wasn't random, it wasn't crazy. It was calculated. By the time I finished the second wall, the comments got louder. That dog's the only one who understands him, someone muttered at the diner. Bet he's got a bunker under there too. Another voice added. I kept my head down, ordered my coffee, left a tip, walked out. Rex was waiting by the truck, ears up, eyes scanning the parking lot like she was still on duty. She did that. Stayed vigilant even when there was nothing to guard against except small-town gossip. Let him talk, I told her as we drove home. She huffed in agreement. By mid-November, I'd finished all 4 walls. The house looked strange, I'll admit, like it had grown wooden armor overnight. Some of the logs were stacked waist-high, others reached the windowsills. I'd left narrow channels for ventilation, and cut strategic access points so I could pull firewood directly from the outside without stepping into the cold. Inside, I'd set up a wood stove in the living room. Nothing fancy, just a cast iron unit I'd picked up at an estate sale and restored myself. It vented clean, burned hot, and most importantly, it could run all winter on the wood I'd already cut and stacked. Rex claimed her spot 3 feet from the stove. She'd curl up there every evening, chin on her paws, watching me work. Sometimes I wondered if she remembered the cold nights we'd spent overseas. The missions where staying warm meant the difference between alert and hypothermic, between alive and not. I think she did. The first serious frost came in early December. Then the forecast changed. Arctic front, record lows, multi-day storm systems sweeping down from Canada. I checked my supplies, checked the stove, checked the walls. Rex watched me move through the house, and I swear she understood. This wasn't preparation. This was survival. The neighbors didn't know it yet, but the laughter was about to stop, because when that storm hit, only one house in town was going to stay warm, and it wasn't going to be theirs. The storm didn't arrive like weather. It arrived like a verdict. 3 days before Christmas, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 4 hours. By nightfall, the wind was howling so hard it sounded like something alive was trying to get inside. The kind of cold that makes your lungs ache. The kind that finds every crack, every gap, every weakness in a structure and exploits it. I was ready. Rex wasn't nervous. That told me everything I needed to know. She'd been a detection dog in situations where being wrong meant people died. She had instincts I'd learned to trust more than my own. And as the wind picked up and the first snow started to fall, hard horizontal stinging, she simply walked to her spot by the stove and lay down. Message received. We're good. The power went out at 11 p.m. I heard the transformers blow 3 blocks away. Sharp cracks like gunfire, then darkness rolling across the neighborhood. Through the window, I watched the streetlights die one by one, watched the warm glow disappear from the houses across the street. Inside my house, nothing changed. The wood stove didn't care about power lines. The firewood wall didn't care about the grid. I added 2 more logs, adjusted the damper, and checked the thermometer on the wall. 68 degrees. Stable. Rex lifted her head, ears swiveling toward the door. Not alarm, just awareness. She heard something I didn't yet. Then I heard it too. Voices outside, panicked, muffled by wind and snow but unmistakable. Won't start, kids are freezing. Pipes are already. I moved to the window. Across the street, I could see flashlights bobbing. Someone trying to load their family into a car that wouldn't turn over. Another neighbor standing on their porch, phone to their ear, probably calling relatives who lived somewhere warmer. The cold was winning. Fast. Rex stood up and walked to the door. Not frantic, not barking. Just stood there, staring at it. Then she turned and looked at me. I knew that look. Not our problem, I said quietly. She huffed. Turned back to the door. They laughed at us, girl. Remember. Another huff. Longer this time. More insistent. She was right. She was always right. Fine, I muttered. But we're not opening that door yet. The hours crawled by. Outside the storm got worse. Wind gusts hit 40-50 miles per hour. Snow piled up against the firewood walls, which only made them more effective. Natural insulation, windbreak, thermal mass, everything I'd calculated was working exactly the way I'd hoped. But I kept hearing them. The neighbors, car doors slamming, engines refusing to start, someone crying. Rex wouldn't leave the door. At 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on my porch. Heavy, hesitant, then a knock. Soft at first, then harder. Rex's tail started wagging. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, and I'll be honest, I hesitated. These were the same people who'd mocked me, called me paranoid, laughed when Rex carried firewood in her mouth like it was the saddest thing they'd ever seen. The same people who avoided eye contact at the post office and whispered when I walked past. Another knock. Rex whined, low and soft, the sound she used to make overseas when she'd detected something and was waiting for me to act on it. She wasn't detecting danger this time. She was detecting need. I opened the door. A man stood there, mid-50s. Someone I'd seen around but never spoken to. His face was red from the cold. His jacket too thin, his hands shaking. I stopped, swallowed. My wife. She has asthma. The cold is, we can't keep the house warm enough. I saw your chimney. Smoke. I thought maybe. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I stepped aside. He walked in like he couldn't believe it was real. The warmth hit him and his knees almost buckled. He stood there in my entryway, staring at the wood stove, at Rex sitting calmly beside it, at the walls that weren't shaking despite the wind outside. How? He whispered. I didn't answer, just went to the door and looked out into the storm. More flashlights. More people realizing their heaters had failed. More families with nowhere to go. Rex came and stood beside me. She leaned against my leg, and I understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. Preparation isn't just about survival. Sometimes it's about who you save when survival isn't enough. By 4 a.m., my living room looked like a refugee camp. 7 people, 3 families, all of them sitting as close to the wood stove as they could without touching it. Some wrapped in blankets I'd pulled from my closet. Others still in their coats, too cold to take them off yet, waiting for their bodies to believe the warmth was real. Nobody spoke much at first. What do you say to the man you mocked, when he's the only reason your kids aren't hypothermic? The first man's wife sat in my recliner, inhaler in her lap, breathing easier than she had in hours. Their teenage daughter was on the floor next to Rex, one hand buried in the dog's fur like she was anchoring herself to something solid. Rex didn't mind. She never did. Another family had brought their elderly father, a man who'd lived in this town for 70 years, and refused to leave even when his son begged him to move south. He sat on the couch, hands shaking, staring at the wood stove like it was a miracle. I remember winters like this, he said finally. His voice was rough, tired. Back in the 50s. Lost 2 neighbors that year. Cold got inside their walls and never left. He looked at me, really looked at me, not the way people usually did, with pity or discomfort or polite distance, with respect. You knew, he said, didn't you? I shrugged. I guessed. That's more than the rest of us did. Another knock at the door. This time it was Mrs. Cranston, the woman who'd called me crazy, who'd laughed the loudest when Rex carried firewood. She stood on my porch with her husband, both of them shivering so hard they could barely speak. We didn't know where else to go, she said quietly. I let them in. By dawn there were 12 people in my house. I kept the stove fed, kept the temperature steady. Rex moved between them like she was doing a head count, checking on each person before circling back to me. Old habits. K9 training doesn't fade, it just finds new missions. One of the kids asked if he could pet her. She'd be offended if you didn't. I said. That got a small laugh. The first one all night. Around 7 a.m., I heard something outside. Not wind this time. Something else. I moved to the window and saw snow piled nearly 2 feet high against the firewood walls. But more than that, I saw one of the ventilation channels I'd built starting to get blocked. If that vent closed off completely, smoke could back up into the house. I grabbed my coat. Where are you going? Someone asked. Just checking something. I stepped outside and the cold hit me like a physical blow. The wind hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten worse. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, but I didn't need to see. Rex was already out there. She'd slipped through the door behind me, and now she was at the blocked vent, digging, paws working fast, snow flying. She'd sensed the problem before I'd even said a word. Good girl. I called over the wind. Keep going. She didn't stop until the vent was clear. Then she moved to the next one, checking it. Then the next. Methodical, thorough. Exactly the way she'd been trained. I followed her around the house, clearing what she couldn't, checking the structural integrity of the firewood walls. Everything was holding. The logs were doing exactly what I'd designed them to do. Blocking wind, trapping heat, keeping the interior protected. By the time we came back inside, Rex's fur was caked with ice. I grabbed a towel and started rubbing her down. She stood there patiently, tail wagging, eyes bright. One of the neighbors, a younger guy, maybe 30, watched us. That dog, he said slowly, just saved all of us, didn't she? I didn't answer right away. Just kept drying Rex off, working the ice out of her coat. She's been saving me for years, I said finally. Guess she figured she'd add a few more to the list. The man nodded, swallowed hard. We were wrong about you, he said. All of us. We saw the firewood, and the figured egg. We thought you were running from something. Turns out you were preparing for something. Same thing, I said quietly. Rex finished her circuit of the room one more time, then settled by the stove. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in years, I wasn't alone, and neither was anyone else. The storm broke on the third day. I woke up to silence. Not the howling, violent silence of wind pressing against walls, but real silence. The kind that means something has ended. Rex was already at the window, ears perked, watching the world outside turn from gray to pale blue as the sun finally broke through. I stood beside her and looked out at what the storm had left behind. The town looked like a war zone. Downed power lines draped across the street like dead snakes. Trees split in half, their frozen branches scattered across yards, roofs sagging under the weight of snow. And everywhere, houses with dark windows, cold, empty, abandoned by families who'd fled to relatives or emergency shelters. Everywhere, except mine. Smoke still curled from my chimney. The firewood walls stood intact, packed tight with snow that had only made them stronger. My house looked strange, sure, wrapped in wood and ice like some kind of hibernating creature. But it was standing, warm, functional. The people inside started waking up, stretching, checking their phones now that they'd finally recharged from the small solar battery I'd set up, making calls to relatives, letting people know they'd survived. Mrs. Cranston was the first to speak to me directly. I need to say something, she started, her voice hoarse from 3 days of dry air. What I said about you, about your... She glanced at Rex. About all of this, I was cruel, and I'm sorry. I nodded. Didn't need a speech, didn't need absolution. Forget it, I said. No, she stepped closer. I won't forget it. None of us will. You didn't have to open that door. We wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't. Yeah, you would have, I said quietly. And you would have been right too. She didn't argue. By mid-morning, the power crews had started working their way through town. We heard the first hum of a generator, 2 streets over. Saw the first set of headlights, as a plow finally broke through the main road. One by one, families started leaving, heading back to their cold houses to assess the damage, to start the long process of cleanup and repair. But before they left, something happened I didn't expect. The elderly man, the one who'd remembered winters like this, pulled me aside. There's a town meeting scheduled for next week, he said. Once things settle, I'm going to propose something. What's that? That we ask you to teach us. How to prepare. How to think ahead. How to not get caught like this again. I started to shake my head. I'm not a teacher. You taught us plenty these last 3 days. He glanced at Rex, who was accepting ear scratches from the teenage girl one last time. Both of you did. He left before I could argue. By noon the house was empty again. Just me and Rex and the slowly dying fire in the stove. I should have felt relieved. Should have been glad to have my space back. My quiet, my routine. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Useful. 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of 30 people at the community center. They'd come to learn how to insulate without electricity, how to store food long-term, how to recognize weather patterns, how to prepare not just for survival, but for the possibility that you might need to help others survive too. Rex sat beside me the entire time. Every once in a while, someone would raise their hand and ask her a question instead of me. Does she really understand what you're doing? How did she know to check those vents? Can we meet her after? I let them. Let her be the hero she'd always been. At the end of the session, Miss Cranston approached with a small wooden plaque. The town council voted, she said. We're making Rex an honorary community guardian. For her service, for what she did during the storm. I looked down at Rex. She looked up at me, tail wagging, completely unaware that she'd just become the most respected member of a town that had once laughed at her. She'll accept on one condition, I said. What's that? You stop calling me crazy. Mrs. Cranston smiled. A real one this time. Deal. That spring, I rebuilt the firewood wall. But this time, I wasn't alone. Neighbors showed up with logs, with questions, with tape measures and notepads, and a genuine desire to learn. Rex supervised, of course, carried the small pieces, barked when someone's stack looked uneven. And when the work was done, when the walls stood strong and ready for the next test, I stood back and realized something. I'd spent years building walls to keep the cold out. Turns out, I'd been building bridges the whole time. I just needed a storm to show me the difference.